Hi, welcome to the Sales Compensation Show, the podcast where revenue leaders and sales compensation experts break down the strategies that drive performance. At Forma.ai, we recently hosted RevOps Kickoff 2025, a digital conference designed for revenue operations leaders, covering the most pressing challenges in GTM alignment and strategy. The response was incredible, and we didn't want these valuable discussions to be locked away in a one-time event. So we're interrupting our regular programming to bring you special episodes of our show, featuring the RevOps Kickoff Live panels. Different from our usual one-on-one deep dives, these episodes capture live panel discussions with top RevOps executives and industry leaders, tackling the most critical revenue challenges together. The fourth episode in our series of RevOps Kickoff panels dives into what leadership and CROs expect from RevOps in 2025. Our speakers discuss how RevOps serves as a key player at the crossroads of strategy and execution and a trusted advisor to leadership. Listen in as Nabeil Alazzam, founder and CEO of Forma.ai, sits down with Susan Rothwell, CRO at Epsilon, Allison Metcalfe, CRO at Cloudinary, and Latané Conant, CRO at 6 Sense.
I did want to start off just kind of level setting the audience to, what we define as RevOps, given that it could look very different in different industries and roles and organizations. And so again, I'll just kind of bring it back to you, Susan, and just go around the room here and get a sense of how you define RevOps in your organization.
Yeah, so I look at RevOps from the point of view of really being the intelligence behind the numbers, right, that really set up the strategy, right? So you really need to understand what's going on in the business, not only what happens. So many times when we look at revenue operations, there could be a reporting aspect that looks back at what the story was versus into the future of what the story is potentially looking like or what it can be, right? So I look at RevOps to provide insights, to sit as my right-hand person to tie me, to finance, and to also, as I was saying, I always tell my teams, like you always, as an organization, we always need to be making sure we're moving where the business is, because people get frustrated because companies reorganize. Well, you need to reorganize so that you can be where the business is. And I think there's an element of RevOps that kind of can look down the road and help you make some of those really important decisions to get yourself in position so you're not chasing and you're actually leading when you're out in the marketplace, particularly against the competitors in a very competitive marketplace. So I look at them, my right-hand person, from that perspective. And then there's really, to me, two other pieces of there's RevOps, and then there's sales enablement that kind of tie together, as well as sales operations. So to me, sales operations is more the process involved. Sales enablement is, getting your sellers ready and making sure they're engaging with customers and things like that. And then RevOps to me is really the intelligence and the data to help us really make the critical business decisions that we need to make every single day.
I get Latané, Allison, I guess maybe just to jump over to you, Latané, because you come with the CMO background is very interesting, given that you try to bring these two things together typically in the RevOps world, right?
Yeah. So I guess just like, what does RevOps own at 6 Sense? So our head of RevOps has ops for sales, partnerships, professional services, and customer success. Also deal desk, compensation, and enablement. So that all sits under her. And really it's the analytics, as Susan talked about. It's systems, it's data. So standing up Snowflake is part of that, and working with IT. It's a lot of the process, and then we spend a ton of time on like the strategy and planning. What I didn't include is marketing ops, which I think is an interesting, we can debate that. But I think that for now, it is excluded, and coming from the marketing side, a lot of marketing ops is actually like getting campaigns out the door. Like there's a lot of it has to do with just like executing the campaign. And so I like that to be as close as possible to actually where the work and the campaigns are getting designed. Probably something that could be debated, but for now, that's how we have it.
Yeah, and I can offer, I think similar, but maybe slightly different. So I refer to it as go-to-market ops. So the role that's on my team is a VP of go-to-market ops and enablement. And it's a really, I will acknowledge, it's a really big job. It's a really important job. It's probably the most important role on my team, to be honest with you, because it's equal parts architecture. So designing how the waterfall should work, what the conversion rates should be, the metrics, that ultimately tell me how many salespeople I need, how much capacity I need, how many SDRs I need, what their productivity should be, what the pipeline requirements are, all of that stuff. So kind of designing the actual architecture. And then second, okay, we've got the architecture designed. Now we're going to figure out what the leading indicators are of the success of that architecture, and we're going to predefine that. One analogy that I've talked about a ton and is like I kind of imagine myself walking into a bank when there's all the world clocks up on the wall and except replace those replace times with KPIs. We've predetermined what they should be. So you walk in and what the time should be in London or Toronto. We can see it's off time. It may not be obvious why. So then we all focus on what that metric is that's off. We hypothesize why it could be off, and we kind of ruthlessly execute programs and initiatives to get it back on track. I kind of see that all as being led by go-to-market operations because they design the architecture, and so they also kind of are running point on making sure it's working. And I would say like a difference between how I think about go-to-market ops or RevOps today versus in the past is this is not a reactive function. This is not fulfilling reporting requests that I'm asking for or the CFO is asking for. This is very much a proactive function. If any of you guys have gone through challenger sale training, the thing that they always say is don't ask your customers what keeps them up at night. You should tell them what should. And that's what I expect from go-to-market ops. And even to get like vulnerable in therapy for a while, it's like when I have a really good person in this role, I feel safe. I feel comforted. I feel like I can really focus on leadership because frankly, at the CRO level, a lot of what I do is more broad-based leadership and keeping everyone motivated and working together and breaking down the silos and bringing it all together. And so to be able to know that someone's kind of looking at the data and keeping us on track is incredibly comforting to me, and super, super important. Just to kind of refer to something Latané said, I do have marketing apps included. So I have what I like is to have this kind of brain center that's all of the operations, all of the data, moving together. But I will say that's marketing reports to me as well. So it's one go-to-market function at Cloudinary. And one of the ways I kind of stress test where something should be or where it shouldn't be is how much, and again, I'm being a very Silicon Valley hocusy pocusy, but like how much of my energy is spent on things that are not the right place for me to spend time on. And in the past, when I have had marketing apps separate from RevOps or go-to-market ops, whatever you want to call it, I've noticed that I've spent way more time mediating arguments about whose data is right, who should make this decision or what is the conversion rate? Well, Salesforce says this and Marketo says that or whatever. And I'm just like, this is we're not having the right conversation here.
Yeah,
So
one language to cover the entire organization.
yeah, but I will agree, Latané, like I think there's marketing apps is like equal parts. Like when I'm thinking about marketing apps, I'm thinking a lot about the reporting of like how are we doing with pipeline progression? How are we doing with the productivity? Is the model working? Like, yeah. And you're right, like separating that from pure tactical execution of a Marketo campaign makes sense. I have them together.
Analytics. So analytics is under RevOps.
Got it. Yeah.
And it's one of those where I'm like, if it wasn't working, we'd change it, but it's kind of doing its thing. But I think that's a good way to think of it. If I'm having to arbitrate nonsense, we've got a problem.
We've got it, yeah. And then I think you both said, I think the other kind of hot topic, or not a hot topic, but I think it maybe is kind of similar to the where do SDRs sit, sales or marketing, is enablement, right? So I do have enablement as part of the function because I like having my perfect world is when I have a very strong product marketing function, and at Cloudinary that does not report to me, it reports to product, does not report into marketing. So it's like product marketing is deciding how we're going to talk about Cloudinary externally. Operations is going to operationalize that and teach everyone how to do it. But I think you could have enablement sitting outside. I think that also depends on the company and the needs of the business.
Yeah, I mean, they all report into me. So, that's the way that I kind of make sure that the three-legged stool has one area we all connect and come together. But for Epsilon, it is RevOps is a newer function. So is enablement, and so is sales operations. When I came in 2 years ago, and they didn't really have any of those functions in a very large organization. So if you have spent the past 2 years standing those three things up, to make sure that the company, we were looking at things from a financial point of view versus looking at things from a sales revenue point of view, and they're two very different things, right? They eventually meet up, but to really understand like all the things that you're talking about, Allison, in the sense of what do we need to do to make sure that we've got the revenue bucket filled. They're very different functions. So it's been interesting to have to set those things up in a very legacy organization.
Did you
I mean,
have
it's in.
trouble funding it?
Excuse me?
Did you have any trouble funding it? Just because
No, not at all.
you're not a
No.
finance person,
Like,
they
excuse me?
just want quota build, right? It's like they just want quota capacity. Anything that's not a frontline quota capacity, it's like, why are we doing that, right? So that's good that you didn't have trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was, the role was brought in to the CRO role there was brought in to do these things, so, you had to have the support to make sure that it got done.
Yeah.
But I think
I mean,
it's important
something.
is, sorry, I was gonna say, I think you mentioned Susan, and I agree completely. Like, I forgot to mention the connective tissue between go-to-market and finance is incredibly important. This person does need to be, in a perfect world, go-to-market ops can speak finance, and like FP&A can speak go-to-market. But in my experience, we need to be the bridge builders to, more so. And it is very interesting because finance thinks of I'll give you an example. When I joined Cloudinary, they only ever talked about net revenue retention, NRR. And I would say, well, what's the gross renewal rate? What's the gross upsell target? And they really, finance wasn't sure. They didn't know because they're like, we just need NRR of 115%. Like, and I'm like, well, I need to know. I can't just go do that. Like, there's like a lot that goes into NRR, and it was just a really interesting experience to have to try to, pull finance over, to understand those are really important things to us. I also think that the role of the CRO has changed, and maybe that's why some of us are referred to as more modern CROs with different backgrounds in the past, where we're expected to be a lot more analytical and data driven and not just like the deal guy. Like, I might not even be the best salesperson at Cloudinary, but I'm probably the most analytical, data driven, and like investigative journalist at Cloudinary to figure it all out. So I think what's expected of us now as CROs has changed. Thus, the importance of this role, I believe, has changed as well.
Well, Latané, you said something earlier that was spot. It's like, this is not a reactive role. This is a proactive role, right? And I think there's an element of like, the finance lens historically has been very reactive. Like, okay, I need this information. We need to get this, fed into this model, whether it's quota setting, whatever, and then pass it down. The capacity planning, the strategy building, the execution. I mean, yeah, it's definitely much more planning centric, combined with execution. So just to bring it all together, I mean, there's so much here. How do you think about the definition of like an excellent or exceptional RevOps leader compared to, because you've all talked about how this is such a critical role, the right-hand person, orchestrating a ton. How do you differentiate between what is exceptional leadership in this role versus not?
So I think of Anne now as my chief of staff. And, when I first took the role, we had CS ops over here. We didn't even really have PS ops. We had, deal, like it was just all over the place. So, there's just a certain like leadership quality. And I talk about like, don't read me the news. I can read the news. Like, I know how to log into Salesforce and look at a report and gong. like I don't need you to read this to me. I need you to tell me like what are your suggestions for what to do about this news. And so just someone who could kind of, and there's a significant difference And I would say, if you feel like you have a team that's just reading you the news, that's a problem. The other thing is, what I found is a team that was constantly asking me to prioritize all the time. And what I realized is they just didn't know how to do the work. And so they weren't asking me to prioritize. They were asking me to actually show them how to set it up. Um, and so those are kind of the things that have dramatically changed for us as we've restructured the team and brought in new folks that, I mean, they when we talk about identifying churn and the segments we should be in and out of, they're like, got it, we got it. Give me using Gainsight appropriately. Got it. And so it's almost, when when you have it, what you didn't have before.
I think another thing, I agree with everything you said. And I love that analogy, reading you the news. That's kind of the proactive, reactive change. In terms of some other kind of subjective qualities of this person, I would say one, and by the way, I think of it the same way with kind of the chief of staff type of function. Like, it's a proxy in a lot of cases. But this person needs to have a lot of credibility with sales and any quota carrying person, because I actually hold this person accountable to forecast accuracy. Ultimately, the buck stops with her, because the way that I think about that is you need to create a process and you need to create a foolproof, airtight process, and then I also expect that person to be in those forecast calls and helping the VP of sales interrogate what's going on with deals to make sure that they're in the appropriate place. Like, if a deal slips and I find out it should have never even been in that stage, like, that's a really big problem that I would look to go to market ops for, honestly. Trust and respect from the finance team, from the CFO is really, really important. Even all the way up to the CEO. Like, this is just like an incredibly critical person that needs to be both, and it's really hard because they have to be that kind of a bulldog and kind of tough, right? Like, they have to be able to handle, I'm not trying to say I'm on some ivory tower, but like, oh, I want to get paid this commission rate versus that commission rate, or this deal should be Sally's, not Johnny's. Like, I don't really want to spend a lot of time on that. I want go-to-market ops to be between me and that stuff, and make sure that, again, where I'm spending my time and energy is appropriate for what I should be. And they're taking a lot off my plate, and they're giving me a lot of capacity.
Yeah, since I just hired for this role, not too long ago, I'll take a little bit of a different spin on it in the sense that, kind of what would I need from, what was I looking for? And I was looking for someone that had carried a bag, right? That led a team, that could understand the importance of having great metrics and really understanding the velocity of what's going on in the business, whether it's positive or negative, and how they can help make sure that the leaders are having the right conversations all the way down to the sales level, to make sure that forecasts, as you were talking about, are accurate. The other piece of it to me, which was real important, is that executive presence, is that leadership ability, because you do need that person to be able to, answer questions with the CEO has a question, or the CFO, and you really be your proxy at times, because sometimes you're not available, and they need to step up and be able to do that. So there has to be that confidence and that ability to be able to tell the story in a very articulate and fact and data-based way. The other part would be, also, is the fact that technology, it's becoming more and more a part of everything we do, right? And when we're going to have this fabulous platform, it's going to do it all, right? So, but really being able to understand the different pieces of Salesforce and the enablement, and how do we get them to work together, right? And really being able to understand data and what that data does and tells me, so that I can be able to make sure we're doing the right things, with product and marketing and things like that as well. So I think it's a complex hire, but I think all those things for what I was looking for was really important to make that successful, particularly putting a new role within a legacy type of organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing there's it's very logical, but when I think about hiring just broadly across the organization, so it'd be interesting to get your perspective on this. The more of a superstar I hire with a single skill set, the less good naturally they're going to be at other things. So, the balancing act of like you hire the superstar with like experience as a seller, the harder it's going to be to find that person that's a superstar there and on technology. And so it almost goes into, and I'm curious how much the type of leader that you hire has impacted how you built out your RevOps organization to kind of supplement those.
Yeah, that's a really well, and I would plus one to what Susan said. Like the two people that I've had do this function for me with the most success, both had sales backgrounds themselves. So they had empathy and experience, and they knew the difference between spreadsheet math and practical application of that. And that was really important. But I would also plus one, and this is funny, it's a talk track that I say all the time when I'm mentoring people, is horizontal growth is just as important, if not more important than vertical growth. And it makes you, the path to the C-suite or whatever is actually horizontal growth and not vertical growth. Even like as an example, when I joined Cloudinary, my initial idea was that I was going to hire an SVP of sales to run all of revenue, but it was really important to me. And no offense to any of you out there that might be this, but I didn't want to put someone in that role that had only ever done net new logo. I was like, that's just not the whole story, and I think that's a recipe for disaster. I only want to hire someone that has had both had to think about the full cycle. That's horizontal growth, right? And I even would think about myself. The last role that I had before I became a CRO, I was doing a kind of a hybrid go-to-market strategy, go-to-market operations role. That actually prepared me the most to becoming a really the type of CRO that I am today versus the bag carrying that I did in the past. So I'd never thought about it that way, how you described it. But I think you're right. Like having that kind of broad range of perspective and experience so that you makes you so much more valuable with not only your credibility, but also, the insights that you're giving is coming from having seen that movie before and from more than one seat, maybe, right? So that's really, I like how you said that a lot.
You can either no, okay.
Well, and Susan, you just went through this similar to me, but you hope that when you hire someone good, they're going to bring good people too.
Mhm.
And so that was a big thing for me. Like, who are you going to bring? I don't just want you. I want to function. And so, I think that's like the telltale sign of someone who is talented, that others want to follow them into that role, company.
I just wanted to add, like, I think that in any leadership role or any role, when you're constructing the team, just like you were talking about, it's very hard to have all the superpowers, right? All the superheroes have one superpower, right? And I always say you have to, even, with my current leadership role, right? I assembled people with different types of skill sets and expertise to round out and create like a super team. I think that's the same with RevOps, right? Like yes, you have to be good at technology, but do you have to be the technology expert? Probably not. You hire somebody in to do that, right? Analytical, right? So you bring somebody in to do analytics, be the analytical arm of it. So I think it's about, making sure that, you have a really honest feedback conversation with yourself and have people give the feedback. What are your strengths? So what are your areas that you need some rounding out? And you just, it's leadership 101. You just assemble that a team around you. And that's the way you can really cover off on having that really successful team.
You said something very interesting, Allison, and I think around being an investigative journalist, right? And this kind of goes back to maybe the superstar you want to hire, Susan, right? Is this person that understands and is empathetic towards the sales process, but is willing or not willing, just naturally so curious at the analytics to uncover and be relentless to offset and kind of and guide you. And I think, uh, yeah, I think it all kind of like accumulates in this opportunity to kind of highlight insights, highlight opportunities for you to kind of double down and invest in it. And I'm curious, is there something that can bring this to life? Like, are there examples that you have of like bringing this, of how this has actually come to fruition?
So many. And again, yeah, I lean on that because I studied journalism and that's what I wanted to be when I grew up. And it's like, yeah, but it's become one of these things where I'm like, oh, that's actually really helped me. And I didn't realize that it would, because this kind of deep need to understand why. And I do think that if you're too analytical, you forget that sometimes the answer, like the symptom that's leading to this data that you don't like, is human behavior, qualitative, emotional. It could be all sorts of things. And one example, right, would be we recently went through, we're in a really big sales excellence initiative right now, and we're really focused on a couple of key conversion rates that are lagging behind. And the go-to-market ops in partnership with enabling product marketing went on this big investigation to kind of figure out, listening to gone calls, interviewing people, trying to understand what they're doing. And what they found was certain people were too quick to demo. They were demoing too early in the process, and that was really freaking prospects out. And so, but they were doing that because they were not confident in some of the other steps that we've created. So they were kind of skipping things because they were really comfortable with demoing or bringing in the sales engineer, like, "Oh, let's show it to you, and it'll sell itself." And so that was both a process thing, but it was ultimately human behavior that was resulting from a lack of confidence in some of the talk tracks and process that we'd wanted them to do. So it was like, the answer was, we got to build confidence. We got to figure out why this is scary to you, and get you kind of moving along in that journey. Another example would be, we were finding that one of our products was being discounted too much, and you investigate, and it was really all being led down to like one sales manager. That was too often that particular leader's go-to tactic was to discount a little bit too fast. So again, behavior that we needed to go and correct. And I could give you endless examples of this, that it's like, and that's why it's really important to me. Figure out what the KPI is, what that world clock is, what that city is, right? And then the data, but the data will not tell you the why, right? You have to hypothesize why, and then you have to investigate the why, and then you have to probably try more than one thing. That might not just be robotic data analytics answers. It might be emotional change management, type of stuff. I guess there's one other example I can think of. There was like somebody was doing stuff that was like, because they were fearful of what the CFO was going to say, whatever, like just like really truly human behavioral things that were happening behind the scenes. Very interesting.
I think for us, we grew 100% year over year for 5 years, which sounds really cool, and it is cool, but you don't operate the way the size of the company you are, because you just were like growing. And so for us, we actually have always had strong analytics. That's kind of part of our DNA, but we did not have consistent processes.
Mm.
Right. And so, I said every single team here is a different, like, we're a collection of artists. We got the watercolor team and the, graphic designers and the clay sculptural. I'm like, everyone needs to be on like one process, one operating rhythm. And so that's been probably the biggest needle mover for us and we're getting down to the week. I need everybody, it's a big team, and I need to know that every week they're waking up, they're doing the right decisions, they're putting the right things into the system so that we'll get the results that we need. And that just was not choreographed well enough. And I think that makes the team stressed too, because they're like working hard but don't know if it's exactly the right thing. So just being way more prescriptive has been huge for what our new RevOps team has done, really across every single function.
It's funny that you talk about art, because I have an analogy that I'm just cringing, because if my team ever heard me say this, like, she's doing this again. But I'm like, it's jazz band to marching band is how I've been talking about it, because I'm like, like we were the same, right? When we were younger, the jazz band worked, and I love jazz, right? Like 5 or 6 people riffing with each other and making beautiful music. But imagine having a band of 100 people all doing whatever they want and and riffing off each other.
Loud noise at that.
Yeah. It would not be so beautiful. And so, but I will say, it's also interesting from a leadership perspective. I'm very clear on that. Like, this is no longer a jazz band. This is a marching band. And I can see if you're out of order, and I can see if you're not playing when you're supposed to. And you can't, and that, to your point, Latané, not everybody, they feel like, you're suppressing my artistry or whatever. And it's like, no, like, you still have there's still a significant amount of art that goes on to this, but we have to have more science than art at this stage than we are because we've outgrown the jazz band stage.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's the art part of it is telling the story, right? Like I was talking about earlier, right? Being able to assimilate everything that's going on, from a data and numbers and metrics and insights and analytics perspective, and really being able to pull that together to what's the story of what is going on or not going on, and making sure that we have one story as an organization so that we can all rally around what the opportunity is, what the miss is, or whatever. What I've found is when you don't have that, and people start delivering out different pieces of insights or metrics or reports or things like that, and there's not a story wrapped around it, then everybody starts creating their own story. And I'm talking, that could be product, that could be finance, that could be marketing, and then no one's on the same page, right? So I think it's really important that that person or that team gets the confidence of the whole organization, not just sales, that they can rely on all the different things that they're bringing to the table, bringing that with a point of view that's backed up by data and insights and a story, so that we can wrap, as an executive team or leadership team, we can then make sure we're focused together on the right things to move the business forward. So I do think that there's a little bit of art in that, and the ability to be able to do that.
Yeah, I hate it when what I call decisions based on sound bites.
Oh,
It's the worst. I'm like, is this a sound like seriously, And I think that can cause a lot of mistrust and issues, and it's like
Totally.
take
I always say the sound bite becomes the story.
yeah,
Versus all the data and insights and facts become the story. So someone's, "Oh, that was a horrible month. Look at, we were down, blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, "Oh, all of a sudden, sales is tanking." The soundbite becomes the story.
right,
Huh.
right.
Well, and that's why it's so important to predetermine what's going to inform our story. So, Latané, I saw on your LinkedIn, you're a V2 mom enthusiast. I'm a big V2 mom person as well. Like I use that as kind of my blueprint. I've been supported with OKRs, but the point is, and I also am very disciplined and passionate around creating like the rhythms of the business, and when are we in contemplative debate, review, you know, I don't know how else to say it, like debate and review and hypothesize and what have you, versus when I'm in execution mode. And this is something that I'm also really, this is even more change management though for the rest of the leadership team, because what I hate more than anything is whatever the CPO is like, so and so said this, and then I clicked on this report, and it's exactly what you're talking. And I've decided this is what's happening, and it's like, no, 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 like we're not doing that. First of all, come to the QBR that we have, and this is where we're going to tell you everything that we've decided and what the story is going to be. One data point is not a trend, right? It's and despite the objectivity of data can actually, you can use data to tell any story you actually want,
Yeah.
Marketing, I'm a genius at it.
Exactly.
For you.
When I was pregnant, I found lots of data that said one glass of wine was fine, and that's the data I chose to believe. But it's like that's why that kind of predetermining, this is how we're going to measure ourselves, right? This is it. And I'm not to say I'm not rigid. Like if there's other data point, hey, this is some new information. Great, we should absolutely discuss that. But spending the time up front with finance, with product, with the CEO, with everybody, and then that go-to-market ops function being the one who's driving that, and then inputting the data, that's really, really powerful. That also creates more execution and capacity for everyone and keeps everyone focused on the right things.
I love like the whole transition of the art to the science, and everything we cover is so spot on as we see sales organizations scale. I'm curious. I mean, like in the grand scheme of things, you think about like you are trying to make science of the art of sales as you scale, right? You're trying to capture the nuances and then see if you can figure out a data. But like, how do you, um, I guess, how do you blend those? Like, how do you figure out where you are letting the organization run with the art, the creativity, versus enforcing very specific scientific demands of how that specific process step is run, whether it's the demo and when you do it, all the way to how we engage with the customer.
I think like I'm sure you guys all have a sales process and there's clear exit criteria. And then there's sort of like suggestions for what we want you to do. Like, but you got to nail the exit criteria. Like you can't be a 2 and a 3. You're either a 3 or a 2 because this has either happened or not. Um, so I think it's just being clear on like, these are the places where, sure, like you can season your steak, but we're all having a steak, and it's the same with like the customer journey. We've just done a lot of work around that. And there are some things that I'm like, this is a must do. This is, each segment should decide what works for a strat account versus a commercial account. That's fine. So I think it's just being like clear where bring your art, great. But these are my must haves and not everything can be a must have, so it's kind of like just being declarative about it.
Yeah, I would agree. Like there's certain things must have certainly non-negotiables, right? But what I've also made, and by the way, I look to product marketing to be a lot more of the kind of the pop art, if you will, right? Like this will make prospects feel fearful, or if you demo too early, this is what's happening psychologically to them, and that is a little bit more. It's artistic based in science, I guess. But yeah, I think being very clear in the non-negotiables, but also I stress to the team, like, if this is not working, you gotta tell us, right? Like, if there's something that we're asking you to do, not demo in stage 1 or whatever, that is really hard for you to get away from, and you have evidence that that's not working, we wanna hear that, right? We wanna tweak it and get better, so the feedback loop should be constant, and I don't want my team, like the people, the boots on the ground, to feel like they're just drones executing on some process and plan that was created, millions of miles away that has no connection to reality. So it needs to be a collaborative process. But again, the more and more you grow, the non-negotiables actually that list gets bigger and bigger, and it kind of has to. Otherwise, you do have chaos. And I think the art comes in a little bit more with your style. It comes in a little bit more about your relationship building and your rapport and how you engage with people and your tactics for how you multi-thread or how you're getting into other parts of the organization. All of that can be a little bit more of your own flair. But the non-negotiables have to be followed.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think that one of the areas too that I don't know if someone had put it in the chat, or I saw it, but is also about this, that an intangible would be the trust factor, right? And where I've seen some of my sales organizations get into trouble, particularly when now that we have RevOps looking over and we didn't before, is that fearful to taking things out of the forecast, fearful of saying, hey, we lost something, or, putting it down, punting down the actual truth of what's going on out there. Because there, perhaps had been repercussions in the past if people did that, right? So there's along with the process and the must-haves and the non-negotiables, there is an element of trust that you have to have, like the sales organization has to have with the RevOps team, to know that, hey, like I've always said to my sales team, we lose deals. Clients don't make decisions. Things don't always happen the way we did. If they did, then we wouldn't have forecasts, right? Because we know what would happen. You don't need salespeople, right? Because the fact is, it's all going to fall into place. So I do think RevOps has a really important, position there to really help with that, because that becomes to me a little bit of, yeah, you can have all the process in place, but if there isn't a trust that you can kind of come and say, hey, something blew up, and that can really put things on edge and really cause a lot of angst for the organization as to what's going on in the business, as well as the sales organization feeling like they can't be 100% upfront with what's actually going on out there.
Kind of bringing it back to the role, we were saying, what is RevOps for us? And what you said resonates a lot for me, because if they are like keeping the trains running on time, if they're helping you with the operating rhythm, then you can be out in the field so much more. Like I always say, I don't want to be in the locker room. Like I need to get out of the locker room. And that's when you learn, when you're on calls with reps or with your managers or with customers. So I think it's like enabling us to be able to do those type of activities and kind of be the listener and the leader that we want to be.
Especially, I mean, for me, I'm working in a very global, very distributed company with 3 technical co-founders who are more comfortable and very well versed in PLG than enterprise selling and SLG. So I have to do a lot. Like I don't mean to get into a different conversation, but I honestly believe that people don't understand, or they misunderstand what the CRO role actually is, right? So I spend a lot of time educating the rest of my leadership team about what's going on and telling stories and helping, making, getting involved in product and helping think about things like that. And I can't do that if I also have to be on every single forecast call interrogating the numbers, and if I also, all of these other things. So creating that capacity um, for us is so important. Even to the extent that I will say I'm on the board of a smaller company. They're like 12 million in revenue, and super interesting. I'm coaching the CRO who's more first CRO role, and I'm talking to the CEO about where he's seeing challenges. And it was really interesting because all the stuff that he was saying, I'm like, yeah, that's because you're missing a role, which is this go-to-market ops or RevOps role, because you're asking him to be to actually to do everything. Yeah. And I'm like, he can't do that. He can't. And they're growing super fast. Like Lana, you were saying, like, he can't do that. And so it was really harming the business not having this function, because the CRO could not be all things to everyone. So
For
super
sure.
important. super.
And then even we talked about this previously, but it's like the world is changing and it's moving faster and faster. And we covered this in one of the sessions yesterday on like the speed of information flows increasing, which means that when a change happens, the whole world just shifts overnight. And so I think, kind of this bridging of like the art, but really enforcing the science at the very critical steps. I mean, uh, the RevOps team is at the heart of that. So I think, like, I would love to get your perspective as the world continues to accelerate, as we move forward, the next 12, 18, 24 months with all the things that are happening, how do you envision the role of RevOps changing?
That's a great question. I think what comes to mind right away is, I think the tech stack stuff, and we've talked about this already, has always been really important, but I think that's going to get even more important with AI and insert buzzwords and, like, how are there's so much noise out there of, like, do we really need SDRs anymore? Can't we just use 6 Sense? I forget your product, Lonnie. Sorry, the creative intel, like the emailing thing.
Agent.
Yes. We're deploying that. But
You still need SDR, so.
I agree. No, I agree completely. But it's more. I think, as I'm kind of trying to articulate this, there's so much noise out there, especially about AI right now. Let's just call that, like, do you even need SDRs? We're not going to have any AEs. We're going to have the first $1 billion company with 2 employees, all because of AI. And why do we need so many salespeople? And can't you just increase efficiency by 300% because of AI? And you need this person to be very well versed in where technology can drive efficiency and where it can't. There's a lot of consolidation conversations happening out there, like a lot more scrutiny on software spend. I know our CFO is like, what's the ROI in every single thing? So being very well versed and being able to talk about what this XYZ thing is driving. But I also do believe, more and more that this role, and there's a lot of, like, talk about what's the best background to become a CRO. Is it a CMO role? Is it whatever? I believe that this is a very powerful function to have on that journey to own the whole bag. So I think being really well versed, again, in that broad perspective is going to be really important, but having a very strong point of view that's credible with multiple stakeholders on the technology side, and what can drive efficiency and what can't, is going to only get more and more important. And I know it already is, but it's going to increase.
Would y'all take a job that did not have this or had it sitting somewhere else?
No.
I did.
And no, if you had to do it again.
If I had to do it again, that's a good question.
I probably would have. I probably would, because I think that. So when you talk about the future of RevOps, and you talk about what the CRO does, to me, so many people think CRO runs sales. To me, a CRO operates sales. Right? There's a whole operation to run sales. It's not just what is your forecast, what is your pipeline, go do it. Right? There's just a lot behind it. All the things we talked about: revenue operations, sales operations, and sales enablement. So, again, I think we talked about this before. It's just, I think this role will continue to elevate.
Yeah, that's a good word.
I think that it will elevate because of the complexity of all AI and all that stuff. That there's going to be continued complexity about how do we use all this stuff,
Yeah.
right? To make sure that we're doing all the things we need to do to run a really great, profitable, business building revenue organization. So I think this role will continue to elevate. I think so. I think that the future is about, much more C-suite interaction, within operating that part of the business. And so, any of the people out there, you really need to be thinking about, a couple of things I talked about, right? That executive presence, that ability to tell the story. And when I talk about tell the story, I'm not talking about making stuff up, but I'm talking about, like, being able to, just like Allison told a couple stories, right? To visualize what concepts do to help people that don't sit in sales. Although I feel like everybody thinks they can run sales or they can do sales. Kind of drives me a little crazy. That could be a whole nother podcast. But
Marketing has it worse. I think marketing has it worse every way.
you do? I don't know. I just think it's all about elevating it and thinking about, as you're out there and you're looking at your own personal journey. And you were talking about, I always say there's left turns and right turns, and the left turns you always learn more about. They're usually more painful. But, how can I start really setting myself up to elevate? Right. And
Yeah.
and make sure I am the person that not only sits by the right hand of the CRO, but also the CEO calls, the CFO calls, the CMO calls. So really putting yourself in the position and thinking ahead, like, how do I do that? And you got to create those relationships. You've got to be good at what you do. You've got to be good at what you do. It's not just relationships. And then you've got to be able to measure things, obviously, all the stuff that you're doing. So that's my few thoughts on that.
But Latané, you said, like, would you take a role that didn't have this or wasn't going to let you build it? I wouldn't, because I truly believe I would not be successful. Like, there's skill gaps for me. So this is a huge skill gap for me that helps me. But the other thing I would not do is join a company where they insisted this function report into finance. So I've seen that, and that was insanely painful. Never got what I needed. Everything had a financial tilt on it. And so finance was being served, but I was not being served, and I'll never, ever do that again.
Yeah. It's like, can I get a report over here? Hello.
Yep. Or the reporting would be like again, I'm saying Latin because from the marketing background, it's like earmuffs, but like, oh, we've built this whole like single touch or last touch attribution reporting. So this is how marketing should be spending. You're like, oh,
Now I have to tab anymore because for self-distribution model,
and now I have to spend all my time going back to my other thing in terms of time well spent versus not. So now I'm going to go and explain multi-touch attribution and how that's just not how people, like, that's not how buyers operate. And this is not good use. This is not a good use, of time. So, that's the other big no-no for me. And I know, like, some companies really, and there's some CFOs who are like, there's so many different flavors of CFOs, right? There's CFOs who are pure play accountant type of people that are counting the money. And then there's ones that fancy themselves a lot more operational or commercially minded, which is great. But the go-to-market team needs to own its own metrics and be able to drive the business. They need to have close collaboration with finance. And that's why, to me, like, the best I've ever had it was when there was an FP&A person embedded. So there, and go-to-market was like, and we were like we worked very, very closely together. So finance felt very informed and a part of it, but we were being served in go-to-market.
Yeah, which is, I mean, they need to be, right. It is one of the largest cost centers of the business and investments in go-to-market. And so I think, but I agree, with your statement wholeheartedly. I think very well suited within sales. And Susan, to your point, it's a machine. You're running a machine, and we're kind of on time here, but I think it all comes together because if you go back 100 years, the role of the salesperson was truly 100% art or 99%, right? Like they were on the road. There's no data collection. Everything was up to that individual that was doing the selling. And now with technology, almost every part of the customer interaction is captured. And if you don't treat it like a machine, it's very hard to scale to tens of thousands of sellers selling, hundreds of products to global meet customers and all the complexity that comes with it. I mean, you have to treat it as a machine. And if you don't have the machinery operations within your control, it's very hard to kind of own that end result and that end number. So I wholly agree. Given that we're 4 minutes here to wrap up, just maybe going around, 30-second kind of like takeaway of like one tactical piece of advice for every sales ops person that's listening in and how they can better help and support their CRO.
I don't know if this answers, but one thing I think I'll just add as something to think about is we talk a lot about sales like net new. And for those of us in SaaS, like the bulk of my revenue is actually under CS. And I find those areas are often very underserved by ops.
Totally.
And so I guess my piece of advice would be think about really where the revenue is and make sure that you have the right resource and tech stack around that. I think sales and marketing is sexy. There's, but like that's where the rubber meets the road. And I think I just would make sure not to underinvest in that.
Yeah, I love that.
I think the two I would to add to that, I think in the interest of like the horizontal or broad perspective, I think proper P&L fluency and really understand being very fluent in P&L, again, to be able to speak that CFO language, and marketing fluency to understand top of funnel metrics and multi-touch attribution, to really make sure you understand the whole picture, right? So I totally agree, Latané, like the account management side, the CS side, what are the leading indicators of renewals? That's really difficult and it's super underserved. And I think people avoid it because it's harder, to be honest. It's harder to marching bandize that side. And I often think marketing gets left alone a little bit sometimes too, where I do believe people often, everyone's thinks they can be a marketer. And I have tremendous empathy for marketers because I think it's really hard. But I think that P&L fluency and really understanding EBITDA, what's in and what's out, what's how are they calculating CAC and what's going into sales and marketing as a percent of revenue, and some of those like harder coded financial terms. Again, it's all in the interest of elevating you to use Susan's language and building your credibility with multiple personas is also going to make you not only going to make you more efficient and powerful, but it's going to make your CRO look better. And even give them even more capacity.
Yeah.
And I'll just say quickly, because I know we're out of time, like really understand the plan. What is the plan? What are the goals? Like start there. What are the company's plan? What is the plan we're at? And make sure that everything you're doing builds back from that and then connects forward so you can get to that plan. Because that's what it's all about, right? It's all about hitting the plan or exceeding the plan. And really, really understanding all the nuts and bolts behind that plan will make you really successful. That's where it really begins and ends for all of us that's involved in revenue.
Awesome. I just want to say thank you again for being on the panel today. And I started my career in this world 15 years ago, and I wouldn't have imagined sitting in a room with such like excellent, amazing, and experienced leaders and having this discussion. But I truly, really enjoyed it, and I think giving back to the community of sales ops folks in this role, as I've seen it personally elevate in the last 15 years, and continue to do so. So thank you all for joining, and thank you to the panelists, Latané, Allison, Susan, for being on and sharing your wisdom. The Sales Compensation Show is brought to you by Forma.ai, the sales performance management platform that fully integrates sales planning with rapid, scalable incentive compensation management. Our data platform brings together how you can plan and manage the entire lifecycle of territories, quotas, and incentives. With global customers like Autodesk, Stryker, and Hootsuite, we enable go-to-market teams to plan and deploy even the most complex SPM strategies at speed, taking you from idea to execution instantly. To learn more about Forma.ai, visit our website at Forma.ai. Hit the subscribe button and find more episodes of this show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Thanks for tuning in.